Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat to authors, publishers, editors, all sorts of people involved in this crazy industry that we are in. And today we are delighted to have a very special guest for our 42nd episode. It is Leah Busboom, who is a wonderful author of romance books. And she is here today to talk to us all about her journey towards finding where she fits into the marketplace. So Leah, we're delighted to have you here today. How are you doing?
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, we are very, very pleased to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Roland. Welcome, Leah. So we were talking over email about you coming on, and because you were telling me about how at multiple points in your career of writing romance, you had to pivot, you had to evolve with the market in a couple different ways and a couple different sort of subgenres. And I think that that's like a really important topic, because I think sometimes people start writing and then they almost get fixated and tunnel vision and be like, this is the way I'm writing, and this is, and then it's not working, and they just try to plow forward with what they're doing exactly and not changing and not really looking at sometimes it's nothing to do with them. Sometimes the market is moving. Sometimes they're just, maybe they're not they haven't figured out their niche or their fit. And so it's really important to be able to evolve with the market to find your own strengths and your own success, right? So you've had to do that a couple of times. So it's probably like a really good, case study for people to understand sort of what you went through and learn from that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on, how it sort of started for you, where you first had to pivot, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Well, I wrote these 3 baseball romances. And, I kept wondering, what do I have to do to get these to sell? I really like them. Of course, an author always likes their own work, right? But I'm really more of a sweet romance or clean and wholesome romance author. And I didn't realize for a while, I started reading sports romance, just like devouring them, trying to figure out, is my writing, is that really what's not competing? And I decided 2 things. One was my covers were kind of lame, maybe not quite steamy enough. Now, when you think about it, here I was with a book that was sweet, clean and wholesome, and I was going to put a steamy cover on it. Kind of gives the wrong message, right? But I was wanting to compete in this marketplace. So the first thing I did was change the covers. And I got lots of my friends joking, saying, wow, woo, steamy covers, and yet the content was still the same. It was the same sweet romance book. So after reading several sports romances, and really mine, it's not that they weren't selling at all, but they weren't selling like I expected them to sell. And the cover change made no difference. You know how you always say, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, I was trying to draw readers in by this change of cover, which, when you think back about it, is kind of maybe a rookie mistake kind of a thing. But, I was trying to say, okay, maybe it's my cover that's, putting people off.
Well, so when you, because I feel like the sports romance is probably in general, like you said, a steamier read as well, not just a steamier cover. And were your blurbs sort of clear about how yours were more clean and wholesome?
Yes, I think so. So I was giving this series of mixed messages, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
A kind of clean, sweet blurb, a steamy cover, and then a story that was sweet, clean and wholesome. So, what I decided? I said, I don't think I can compete in this market. That isn't me. My voice is not this steamy romance writer, So I gave up, and maybe I shouldn't. for that genre, but it just kind of hit home that that's really more steamy romances. And how was I ever going to compete unless I found that one person who liked sweet sports romance?
And
cheap at that point, right?
Yeah, and one person isn't going to help your career too much, right? One at a time, but not one and done.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So I think you're right. I think you did make the right decision because, like I said, I think that the market for sports romance is, it's like that. I think maybe that I always hate to sort of guess at what women are thinking about in terms of like why they're trying to buy these books. But my male sort of opinion of that would be that, that the sports guys are the alpha males, that's why they have this. Yeah, right. And that's drawing in readers that probably want to hear about those muscles and see them in action. So you're gonna probably have they're gonna be wanting a more steamy read, right? So you're right. Like if you have a sweet in a typically steamy category, it's not a great thing. And even if you draw the people in with a steamy cover and they maybe don't notice in the blurb, or even if you change your blurb and made it sound steamier, what will that do? That will lead to potentially bad reviews. Or at the very least, you'll be selling to people that will then decide, I'm not going to buy your next one, right? So it's an uphill battle at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like buying a box of cookies thinking they're chocolate chip and then finding they're oatmeal raisin. When there's nothing wrong with oatmeal raisin, it's just if you expect chocolate chips, you're like,
yeah, good analogy. Exactly. I was trying to get people to read my book on a false pretense, so to speak, right? That steamy cover. I thought, it's just my cover, but it wasn't. I was trying to compete in the wrong niche of that market.
That takes a lot of self-awareness to like get to that level. A lot of self-awareness that I think some aspiring self-published authors never get to, and that's perhaps why they don't end up achieving success. So what was it that like clued you in, that made it just click for you?
I think it was after I read several. I have a friend who also lives in Colorado, and she writes hockey romance. And I read a lot of hers, and I realized, mine don't compete in terms of steaminess, for sure. So, it's kind of hard to give up. A lot, it's your human nature to persevere, right? I can do it. But why try to compete against your nature, against your natural, what you want to write? So I switched to a more clean and wholesome, like small town romances, where I pivoted to. And then in most recent time, the thing that made me switch a second time, or at least feel like, have you ever had that feeling of missing out kind of situation? Well, the thing that hit me probably about maybe a year ago was all these covers I was seeing for the rom-coms, where it's sort of a cartoonish cover, I would call it that. Bright colors. There's not a photograph, they're just people depicted as, cartoon images, basically. And I thought, wow, I'm seeing a lot of these covers, like tons of them. And none of mine look like that. So all of a sudden I felt like, I have outdated covers, because a lot of my romances are really filled with a lot of humor. You could call them rom-coms, but here they are having the guy and the gal, staring longingly at each other. And these other covers are sort of, different and exciting and new. And actually, I went to a webinar yesterday, and the gentleman presented some statistics, and he said 41% of the romance market is now those kind of covers, where 37% is the couple on cover. There's been a shift. I mean, I was starting kind of to feel it myself, where the other covers actually have a bigger share of the market. So a couple things I did. One was I went back through and looked at all my romances and said, which ones would really be a rom-com, right? And I changed the covers to those kind of covers. And then the second thing I did was I said, you know what? I really need to start a rom-com series that's admittedly a rom-com, a romantic comedy. So I did that, and you can only write so fast.
So sorry. So when you did this, are you saying that you looked at your existing catalog first of the sports romance and then said,
no, it wasn't the sports, it was the small town.
Okay, so this was after the sports. You switched.
Yeah, I mean, I just said, if those sports romances sell, they sell. I wasn't going to put any more energy in that space. So my small town romance, I went back through. I have a series that has 12 books in that series. And I went back through and I said, now, which of these are really rom-coms, right? I was marketing them as small town romance. And
what's the timeline? Sorry, what's the timeline on that? Did you write the sports romance first, and then you wrote, and then when you decided that wasn't for you, you switched to small town.
Correct.
And then you were writing small town with covers that weren't really and they weren't marketed as rom-com. They were just marketed as small town clean,
Correct.
I guess. Sweet
small
and clean.
Town, sweet, clean and wholesome romance.
Right, and they had real people on the covers.
Yes.
And then you decided rom-com is kind of more your niche, right?
Well, I had this fear of missing out kind of a thing that happened to me. I looked at my covers and none of them looked like these rom-com covers. And in fact, I tried to join a couple author promotions, where we all market each other's books together. And they would say, cover must be rom-com style cover. And
isn't that fun?
It is. I mean, they were very particular about it. But if you ever click on any of those links, if you're on author newsletters and say, oh, here's this promotion, you do notice that a book that doesn't have that kind of cover kind of stands out, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But anyway, a lot of these authors who have these promotions say, nope, I only want rom-com covers in that promotion. Well, I couldn't join. Right? Mine weren't like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we often say, especially when we're talking with authors or when we're, looking at issues about it, we point to the top lists of their subcategory, right, on Amazon, and look at all the covers, and often you'll see, a style that sort of is repeated from author to author. And it's not a matter of everybody copying each other. It's a matter of people recognizing what works in that subgenre and marketing it to that, so that the readers know that that's the kind of book, at least they understand what I'm looking for, that, and that's sort of that first connection you make with them, that first promise of this is the kind of book you want, at least by the cover. And then, they go in and they read the blurb and then all that. Right. So It sounds like, it sounds like that's what you sort of recognized at that point.
I did. And, I thought, I don't really have time to write a new book, fast enough, right? How do I get into this market? How do I compete with what I already have? That's what I was looking at that point, because my idea was just switch out a couple covers. You already have humor. Your books are funny. People comment on that all the time. They qualify as being a rom-com, but the cover puts people off. Unintentionally. I mean, it didn't do that on purpose. So I went back through that 12-book series, and 3 of them stood out to me as, yep, I can market these as rom-coms. I can change the cover, and I'm going to do that. And I did it.
Now, did you have to change the blurb as well?
Yes. The blurbs are written a little differently. They kind of bring out maybe I was trying to bring out the small town sweetness. Now I'm going to bring out more of the humor. What's funny in this book, right? And that seemed like the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak. How do I get in? I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm late to the party. I'm not in the party. So I switched the covers, and then I started writing a new rom-com series that was focused totally from the beginning on this is going to be hilarious, this is going to be funny. And I've published the first book now too of that series.
So let's look at that first. Let's take this, I guess, piece by piece. So with this 12-book series, I'm interested to know, often when you write a series, you sort of keep the subgenre sort of static, right? So it sounds like out of 12 books, were they standalone, each one?
Oh yes, you can write them. You can read them all as a standalone.
Right. So that helps. But so you took only 3 of those and changed them from just regular, small town sweet to rom-com sweet, small town too, I guess. And those 3, you put the sort of the illustrated cover on. Is that
yes?
Right. And
That's
so
correct.
did that change your sales at all? I mean, I know that the difficulty is you've already sort of marketed it. They might be old by the time you change them. Just changing stuff at that point is often difficult, right? Because, people have seen it. They're moved on to the newest thing now. And so unless you start marketing it again and taking those books and sort of like almost like relaunching them, which you can't, you can still do in terms of marketing, but it used to be that you could actually like unpublish them, republish them, get a new ASIN and all that stuff. Now, I don't think Amazon allows that as easily as they did before. So
no, and actually, I see this happening all the time, the new cover thing. But I clearly stated to my newsletter readers, "Hey, I changed these covers. So if you've already read it, don't just think it's a new book, right?" I wasn't trying to do a bait and switch to anybody.
No, for sure.
But what it allowed me to do was join some of these promotions where I'm marketing to the new audience, right?
Yeah.
And expanding my audience into people who want to read humor. My other audience maybe wants to read, heart-touching, sweet, small town. That's fine. That's wonderful. I love those romances. But what about the people who want to just laugh and giggle and, have these funny situations? So those 3 books had that in them. That was already written in there. I just wasn't marketing them that way.
Right. And then, so once you did it help your sales at all?
Yes. And I feel like that really helped the launch of my new rom-com series, because I started to get readers who want to laugh. They're looking for something funny. And so when I launched the new series, the book did really well. Because I feel like still my small town readers would like that book, but maybe not as many of them as these new readers I had drawn in from trying to expand my audience in a way that, I already had those books written. What was I going to do to try to help get into this rom-com market that seems to be fairly structured? The cover, the blurb, and then, what you write inside the book.
I think we always talk about covers being almost like a dress code. It's like if you have a book cover, like with thrillers, like thrillers always have white sans serif text and like a shadowy figure in a sort of vignette. Like 80% of thrillers have that cover. And so if you don't have a cover like that, you're basically telling your potential readers, I don't get this genre. And so, and it strikes me you were in a lucky situation where you weren't baiting and switching, you weren't pretending to be something else. You had books which would generally appeal to this audience, and so by packaging them up that way, that seems like the perfect storm. It seems like what you want to do. You want to be able to tell the stories you want to write, but package them in a way that appeals to people who want to read.
That's correct. Exactly. And it kind of gave me a new life, sort of, as the author. It's like, oh, yay, now I'm in this party. I'm going to compete in this party, rather than try to stick one of my existing books in there with what I would call outdated cover in that genre, just in that niche. And it really gave me like new life, because I'm like, oh yes, okay, now I can write this book as funny as I want, because that's what I'm trying to compete with. humor.
But also, when you talk about community, I think one of the things that you really see with authors who have longevity and find success is they write books that they want to write. And it seems like writing funny books is something that naturally appeals to you more than it's not forced, like maybe writing baseball romance was forced.
Well, exactly. The baseball romances, by the way, were funny too. So maybe I need to just try and figure out how to, make them rom-coms. But you're right. Have you ever heard an author say, I found my voice?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that resonates with me very much. I started off writing, Craig knows about this, MMA romance books, which are about MMA fighters. And a lot of my readers were like, there's an awful lot of MMA and not so much romance. And then I found my niche by like taking old fashioned adventure stories and just focusing on the romance. And it's like, okay, that doesn't appeal to everyone, but I found an audience, but I love writing them. And therefore I can continue writing them. And that's when you get like the magic and everything you wanted to become a writer for, with the ability to actually make money writing. And that's like the sweet spot. That's
where it clicks, so to speak, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm only a romantic comedy author, because I'm still doing the others too. I feel like I can do both. My editor teases me. She says, oh, now you got to switch into the more serious mode. But I think I can balance that. And maybe my readers like the change of pace every now and then. I'll read a more serious one, then I'll read her one that, makes me sit on the couch and giggle, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you're going to find with your new series that, you're starting from day one marketing it as rom-com. You're going to find, and you're already seeing you're having more success with that. You're going to get more people in, and hopefully they will be clicking through to your back catalog and discovering some of that stuff too. Now they'll probably gravitate more to the ones that are clearly rom-com, right? But there'll be some that want to branch out, try the other stuff. Although that is a good reason to sort of like put even if it's not a complete rom-com, maybe put a rom-com sort of like spin, or at least make it clear that it has some of those elements, so that when people go look, they might even look at the Sportsman and see that, oh, it has those same elements, and because I like this author, I'll give it a try, right? So it gives you that multiple entry points too. Like you might find somebody entering from this book or for that book, but then they see the whole catalog, and then you get them from all sorts of angles. So.
I do notice that. I mean, some days I go look at my sales and I'm like, wow, I sold that whole series. How'd that happen? I wasn't actively like just ads and marketing that right then. So I do think you're right. I think you pick up these readers who love your style. The small town is more of a balance between some serious topics and humor. The rom-com is pretty much all humor, some serious, but mostly humor. But who doesn't maybe like that? I've had people in reviews say, whew, this was a nice change of pace. It didn't have so much angst.
I think it's almost like movies. You want to watch movies that are familiar but have a twist. It's like we go and see the Marvel movies again, and Marvel movies always kind of have the same beats, but we like them to be. Craig always gets annoyed with me when I talk about James Bond incessantly. But you go to a James Bond movie because you expect certain things, like you expect him to chat to Q, you expect him to have a dry martini, you expect him to see these lines, but you want it to be fresh and different. So you go in and like see that it's this weird like balance you have to do between what's familiar and what's new.
That's true. Very true.
So yeah, I guess it wasn't a hard thing for you to pivot and to evolve into the rom-com market, because you were already sort of adding the humor to your books. It was just more of a, recognizing that your covers originally were not sort of the right ones, and a change of it. Like I had mentioned to you that when we were talking about this over email, that I've seen those sort of illustrated covers for rom-com for a long time, but I think that they're becoming even more prevalent now. Whereas before it was like sort of a mix, sometimes a rom-com would have the people on it, real people, and sometimes it would have illustrated. But I think now we're seeing it's almost all sort of the illustrated covers for that, and I guess that's what you recognize. And so you said that the webinar was saying that whatever 47% or 41% had illustrated covers. Is that right?
And 37% had the couple on the cover, and then that other percent that's left over is maybe it's the male on the cover, the female, just a little different stuff.
Right. Was that specifically for rom-com?
No, he was speaking about the romance market.
So he's saying, right? For romance, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Roland, what do you think? I don't think I'd be surprised if 41% of the entire romance market is illustrated now. I haven't noticed that. And the couples on the cover is also not huge.
I wonder if it's a subcategory of romance, because I could imagine that if you were looking specifically at certain categories of romance, I could absolutely imagine that. Whereas if you were looking at romance as a whole, I'm not sure. That sounds like a lot, but I've definitely seen an increase in those ones, and they've become almost ubiquitous in romantic comedy and certain other genres. There are a lot of really Tessa Bailey I've got a couple of Tessa Bailey books over there, and they have those covers, and those are like absolutely mainstream. You see them in Barnes and Noble and stuff. So I wouldn't be. Who is the person who did the seminar?
Alex Newton from K-Lytics.
I'm not familiar with him, but that's interesting. I'll look into that, because that seems big, but then it depends on the context of what genre you're looking at.
Right. And, he was giving a general market overview. I can email you a slide that I did screen capture that slide because it was interesting to me. I'm like, oh, okay. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm like just scrolling through the top 100 covers, 100 romance covers. Like, I haven't drilled in to any subgenres for the Kindle, and it's definitely not 41% of them that are illustrated. Like, it's a fairly small percentage, but that's that's the top books. That's not necessarily the like all books, but you kind of want to be sort of mimicking what's at the top more than
I think you want to drill down into, because aiming to write a general romance is a recipe for disaster, whereas if you aim to write, like I write military romances, and in military romances 80% of them have bare-chested guys at the cover or something like that. So depending on your genre, if you can drill down even not that far, and then you look at it and it's like, 60% of the covers look like this, 50% of the covers look like that, the context, I think, in the broader general category of romance isn't so useful, because there are so many different categories, and people don't tend to you don't have people who read steamy military romances and small town romances generally, in my imagination.
Very true. Very true.
Right. Like, that's why I was asking whether or not he was talking about a specific subcategory, because it doesn't seem right to me that all romances 41% are illustrated, because I don't see that, and I'm not seeing that.
Okay. Well, I've seen changes though. Like,
no, for sure. Yeah. I have seen more. Yeah. No, they're definitely, because what we get through the ARC program, I'm seeing romance books every day coming in and their covers, and I definitely do see more illustrated ones than I used to, but they are still mainly in the rom-com and some others categories, but you don't generally see them ever in the more sort of like military bad boy sports, all that stuff. Like yeah. So,
or even sports romances. I don't see those kind of covers. You're right.
No, and generally, if you do, they don't do well. Because it's the same sort of thing where you're not meeting the expectations of the readers. They see a cover like that, they're looking for the steamy sports or military, and they're like, that's not what I'm looking for, right? They make that first judging a book by its cover impression, right? And they're just like, that's not it. That's not for me.
The interesting thing is, I actually didn't like those covers at first. I was the one that would probably read one of those, kind of like, oh, that's sort of cartoonish,
Yeah.
But then as I saw more of them, coming along, so to speak, feeling left out of the party, I started reading those romances more actively, and they grew on me. It's kind of odd, right? So now I have this split personality, right? Where I write the one with the couple on the cover, and I still love those, but I love these two now. But here's an interesting thing. When I sent out my newsletter and said, hey, I said my romantic comedies have got a facelift. And I had a couple of readers write back and say, I hate those covers. Now, see? So, but hopefully they're going to stick with me and not say, oh, because she changed those covers, I don't like her anymore, her books. But, they're not for everybody. So I'm not saying everybody needs to get on this bandwagon, but in order to compete in that niche that suddenly I felt like I want to compete there, I had to do it. I don't think the other kind sell very well.
You can't please everyone. You'll never. Don't even try. Yeah.
Exactly. Why even try? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you don't need to please everyone. That's, I think, the wonderful thing about self-publishing. It's like you just need to. There's that guy Nick Stevenson who says 10,000 readers. That's what you need. If you get 10,000 readers, which isn't very many people when you think of the context of books that sell millions of copies, that's you can make a healthy 6-figure career out of having 10,000 readers.
Mm-hmm.
And
right. Nick's right.
I just think the exciting thing is that, we live in a country of 300 million people. There are 35 million people who Kindle Unlimited or something ridiculous like that. And it's like, you just need that tiny fraction who are into whatever weird stuff that you're into. And you just need to pull them in with that. So tell me about you repurposed some of your small town romances into romantic comedies. And then you said you started writing romantic comedies.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do different to write the romantic comedies based on what you found? I mean, was there a difference in what you wrote and how you approached it and the product that you ended up with?
Yeah. I mean, you had to have these situations where something comical happened. Where when I'm writing small town romance, I don't really think about that as much, right? Can I have her in the one in my first book, she goes to this interview and she's in this big rush to get there. So she puts on a pair of black pumps. Guess what? They weren't matching. So one heel's higher than the other. So I have her walking into this interview lopsided, and she's trying to balance out and pretend she's walking, without a limp, boom, boom. And it was so much fun to write that scene, for one thing. And second, I don't know that I would have just absolutely started the book with that if it was just a small town romance, right? Her klutzy move to try to hide the fact that she, messed up on the shoes.
And, I've read a lot of romantic comedies like the Tessa Bailey ones, and they start off with something like that because it's a very good, because I think, readers like to read about characters doing dumb stuff like they end up doing.
Right. I've had several people comment in the reviews, oh man, I could see myself doing that,
That's maybe not with the high heels, but
yeah.
And then there's the misunderstandings, like where somebody hears like half a conversation and they think that they heard that. I always think of the Three's Company sort of example where that was pretty much the premise of every episode.
Oh, right.
But
you have to sort of focus on that, right? And get those situations
right
in your book.
And all those things could be resolved if people just had a conversation, just say.
Well, I know. You don't want to go too much overboard. Haven't you ever read a book where you're like, just talk to each other?
Yeah, exactly. If somebody would just mention the one thing. Oh, no, I can't say that. Yeah. Oh.
Well, Jane Austen based her career on that, so.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think, too, it's sort of not really, the topic of this sort of episode isn't really this, but it does sort of I'm just curious, when you switch to those illustrated covers that are romance, I imagine that you probably need a different cover designer, and even the price is probably more expensive, I would think, than somebody who is just taking images from the stock sites that most of the covers are based on, and adding some effects and the font and everything, that's one type of cover. But coming up with original illustrated art, I think, is probably a more expensive endeavor, and obviously you probably need people that specialize in that, right? So that was probably an extra thing that you had to sort of move to as well, and evolve with, because you had to probably, my guess is, find a different designer, right?
Very true. Very true. I studied a lot of covers, and they're these kind of more pastel colors. Looked at the fonts. Now, I will say one thing though. On my covers with couples, I can spend hours looking through these stock photos for my couple. Oh, that's not quite the guy. That's not quite the girl. That, and you write a certain hair color, well, then you're limited. You got to, but I found that the illustrated cover was much easier because there's sort of this, you're stepping back. You're not trying to depict them in human form, so to speak, right? You're trying to depict sort of the situation. Like my first one, she's a personal shopper. And there's this great, on my cover, she's holding up these shopping bags, the cartoon character. And he's standing there, he's a grump, and he's got his briefcase, he's a businessman, like that. And oh my gosh, I that cover was done very quickly because I didn't have to look for that couple in a photograph.
Were you actually doing your own covers? I didn't even realize that.
I have to admit I am.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
as long as you're good at it.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
like there are so many authors who are like, don't do your own covers. But then when you're actually good at it, we're like, I do my own covers. But then again, I'm a pretty, and I find it very interesting. I had a lot of feedback from my readers about they love the bare-chested men on the cover, except they don't want to see their faces for the same reason. If they see their faces, it destroys the illusion of whoever they come up with in their head.
That's right. And the couple on the cover, I think, is one of the hardest ones. Because generally speaking, don't cut their heads off, generally speaking, right? Usually you see their face, their facial expression, their hair color. Is the guy taller? Is the girl short? All this stuff factors in. Where on that more illustrated cover, you're just like, oh, well, I found my guy, I found my gal, put them on there, make it look cool.
Yeah, I mean, you can be way more specific about your cover when you can illustrate it and pick whatever, draw it yourself or pick from, I guess, stock images that you can manipulate easier than a photograph where it's like, okay, this guy is kind of like mine, but my guy has dark hair and this guy's blonde, so now I got to cut him off, or I got to, and he's not in the right position, and he's,
or he's holding his mouth funny, or I have one guy, this pair, I really liked them, but the guy's bangs were just, I was like, ooh, why didn't somebody comb your hair before they took that picture? It's just something sets you off that you can't select that couple.
Right. So yeah, I guess from that perspective, illustrated is probably easier to match. Because I was actually, before you even said that, I was actually looking at Shopping for the Grump, which is the one you were talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And
do you like the cover?
Yeah, no, I do. I assumed you were hiring out a cover designer, and that's why I mentioned that. I think most authors who do that, you probably would need to find a new designer, because it's not always the same person that would be comfortable doing that kind of cover as they would from just manipulating stock images. So that would be another sort of area that you would have to pivot or evolve with. But it sounds like for you just pivoted and evolved your own skill set. So
true.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think it's really good cover, and I think you're lucky in that respect, so that you can do both. Like we were saying, like not everyone can, and I mean sometimes they think they can, and it's not a good situation. So this is the new series, right? The one
that is Too busy for love. Kind of funny name, but
and again, that works though, because that's one of the things I think about romantic comedies is the comedy often comes from situations that are relatable, and it's like Too Busy for Love. Then a lot of people who read those books, the demographic of them, they're people who like do struggle with balancing a career or whatever with. So the relatable angle is very important.
Yeah, and I have the books are focused in on, she's the personal shopper. The next one's going to be the personal chef. And a guy is the lead on that one. Decided to switch it up, not just always have it be the girl. And that one I'm coming out with in probably November kind of time frame. Anyway, the other thing though, on writing that second one, everybody reacted really positively to the grump. They liked it. So I'm like, oh my gosh. It's like the person who records a record and then they always say their sophomore record isn't as good, right?
Yeah.
They got a lot, the album. And so here I am sitting there thinking, okay, now I have to switch my mind from funny situations about personal shopping to funny situations about cooking. And is it going to be funny enough? I don't know. I hope it is.
Well, I mean, I think I would think it's almost easier because if all your stories were about personal shopping, I think you'd run out of scenarios.
Oh, no kidding. Right.
So at least now you have a whole different set of things that could happen in a kitchen than could happen when you're
burning down the.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And this is the first book in the new series, or?
Shopping for the Girl. Yeah, that's the first book. That's the one I frantically wrote. Thinking, okay, this one's totally a rom-com. Nobody's gonna, think it's not. And it's been well received. I'm very happy with that. But like I said, I'm a little anxious on the next one. But you don't want your romantic comedy situations to be too crazy or too forced, or
I think forced is a definite in romantic comedies. It's like you want it to kind of feel authentic because then it's relatable.
Right. So when she limped into this interview, I could see it, right? Her shoes looked identical. I mean, and the messy closet, you set up the situation, right? Grab the shoes and run.
Yeah. So are you looking forward to hopefully this being a success and then writing more books in the same vein? I mean, you enjoy writing this. How do you enjoy it compared to writing small town books or baseball books?
Well, small town's still kind of in my heart. I like those too. But there's just something about thinking up these funny situations. And my husband even says to me, "What are you laughing about over there?" Because like we said before, you don't want it to be too forced or cartoonish, or everybody goes, "Well, that would never happen," right? So it's actually a fun challenge.
And I mean, you can merge the two, right? You can have romantic comedy, small town. Right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And in the Grump, actually, there's a very touching scene in there that's not funny, but it's so romantic, and I don't want to totally give it away, but I've had a lot of readers respond to that part of it too, saying, "Oh, and that's what you hope too, right? You want to make them laugh, you want to touch their heart, you want them to remember that story."
Yeah. Because often it makes you feel a certain way, and that's why you pick up that particular author's books, because you're like, I want to feel like this, so you read that.
Exactly. And the news that surrounds us is kind of bearing down on you, and you get this negativity and those feelings. Yeah. And I really like helping people get out of that for 3 to 4 hours, however long it takes them to read my book.
Yeah, reading is an escape for most people, right? Yeah.
So we unfortunately are running to the top of the hour, so we're going to have to cut things off. Leah, where can people find your books?
Well, I'm solely on Amazon right now.
And so they just type in Leah Busboom, and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, That's wonderful. And a final piece of advice, if there is anybody who's listening to this and it kind of resonates them with a bit about like, oh, do I need to change my genre? Do I need to change my cover or something? What is the advice you would give them in making that decision?
Well, you know, the first pivot I did was because I didn't feel like I fit writing wise, right? So try to write that's true to your voice. And then the second pivot I made was, you know, the market, the feeling of being left out kind of a thing, you know, but don't just pivot for the sake of pivoting. If you're happy and you know, everything's going well, but it did breathe a breath of fresh air into my writing to sort of try this new market. And I encourage authors to think about that. Is there a way to branch out that's still you? But you know, it might invigorate your writing and give you whole new things to write about.
Absolutely, that's great advice. Well, Craig, do you have anything else to say as we wrap things up?
No,
no, you know, it's about self-awareness, right? Like, and I think that is what you have in spades over there. So I think, you know, you're at least well positioned to make changes, and you know, you're aware that you have the market. Right. And it's true what you say. You got to be true to yourself, but you also have to think about why you're writing. Are you writing just to tell your story, which is perfectly fine? Are you writing to make a living, which is also perfectly fine? It's not that the two are diametrically opposed, but you know, if you're writing for both, you want to try to merge it, because sometimes the stories you're telling and the way you're telling them are not necessarily meeting the goals of making you the money you need. So if you're aware enough of the market, you can look at it and you can change enough that you can still be true to yourself, but also sell books, right? Which is what it sounds like you did. So congratulations.
Yeah, very, very true.
Yeah. It almost sounds like the moral of a romantic comedy anyway at the end. It's like all you had to do is be true to yourself.
That's right.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, I was going to say thank you so much for joining us, Leah. That's been a really, really fascinating conversation. Hopefully, a lot of people listening to this are going to find it valuable. If you do, make sure to leave a comment down below, and also give Leah a like and a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, whether you're listening to this as a podcast or watching it on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And until then, well, thank you so much for joining us, Leah. We'll be back next week with another guest. And thank you very much for supporting us. Bye-bye.